Welcome to the Indie Film Hustle Podcast, episode number 235. Film editing is now something that almost anyone can do at a simple level and enjoy it. But to take it to a higher level requires the same dedication and persistence that any art form does. Walter Murch.
Broadcasting from the back alley in Hollywood, it's the Indie Film Hustle Podcast, where we show you how to survive and thrive as an indie filmmaker in the jungles of the film biz. And here's your host, Alex Ferrari.
Welcome, my Indie Film Hustlers, to another episode of the Indie Film Hustle Podcast. I am your humble host, Alex Ferrari. Today's episode is brought to you by Blackbox. Blackbox is a new platform and community that is all about financial freedom for filmmakers like you. If you join Blackbox, you will be transformed from being a worker to being a maker of your own content. And you'll be making steady passive income from the global market. Blackbox currently allows you to upload your stock footage once, get it to many global agencies, and then allows you to share that passive income stream with your collaborators. Whether you want to submit old footage that's been sitting around in your hard drives or create brand new content, Blackbox is for you. It's really quite revolutionary. With Blackbox, filmmakers can concentrate on making great content while Blackbox takes care of all the business BS. Just visit www.blackbox.global to find out more. Today's show is also sponsored by Studio Unknown. Studio Unknown is a crack team of audio post professionals known for quality sound on any indie budget. Whether you need a lush surround sound mix or a quick festival submission pass, Studio Unknown can help you with all of your post-sound needs, from sound design and mix to Foley, ADR, and even a custom score. Contact Studio Unknown and mention the Indie Film Hustle Podcast, and you'll get 50% off one day of ADR or 10% off your complete post-sound package. Just go to studiounknown.com. Now, today on the show, we have Lawrence Jordan, who is a film editor with over 3 decades of experience and has worked on some amazing films like Fallen with Denzel Washington, one of my favorite films from the 90s, Assassins, Deuce Bigalow, Male Gigolo, CSI Miami, as well as the new Netflix film Naked starring Marlon Wayans. Now, Lawrence and I sit down and really dig into the craft of editing, how he started in his career, how he works with directors, some unique stories from the edit room, and just talk shop. So without any further ado, here is my conversation with Lawrence Jordan. I'd like to welcome to the show Lawrence Jordan. Thank you, man, so much for being on the show.
My pleasure, Alex. Great to be here.
I've had only a couple editors on, but I've never had an editor with your street cred on before. So I'm really excited to kind of dig in to your career and to your techniques as well.
Oh, well, thank you. I'm flattered. You got to get some more editors that's where all the actions happen.
Well, listen, my audience, the tribe, has definitely heard enough about post. I mean, one of my most successful podcasts ever is Post-Production Workflow, Understand It or Die.
Good title, man. Yeah, absolutely.
That was one of my
life story.
I mean, right? I mean, they just don't get post-production workflow, and it will kill you. And nowadays, I mean, back in the day when you were when I was starting out, it was Avid, and that was pretty much it. I mean, now we're going to get a little geeky, guys, and there was Media 100, there was the Video Cube. If you want to go even farther back, the Montage, which is what I first learned on.
Wow.
Oh, wow. Yeah.
That's you are, I was gonna say you're a much younger man than I, because I started on 35 millimeter film. So
when I went to college, they taught me on the Montage, which was just working on Windows 3.11.
That is amazing, man, because, actually the first Avid show that I ever did was, we started on the Montage. The editor that I was working with, a guy named Steve Cohn, who's a terrific editor, and very into technology, kind of turned me on to the Montage picture processor, the digital version, because they had like a Betacam version.
Right. This is the whole digital, with 8 gigs being like the size of a refrigerator.
Oh, don't start with me. I mean, I have stories about storage.
And then you put the floppy in. And then you take it over to the CMX 3600, and it would never work. It
was a kludge, to say the least.
Exactly. But when they actually took me to cut film in college, they taught nonlinear editing first. Then I think it was online, nonlinear, and then film. Wow. When I went to film, I was like, "This is barbaric." What is this? You cut with a razor blade, and if you like it, you put tape on it? What are we, the Flintstones? This is just crazy talk. And we all did. I did that same bit from, was it Gunsmoke?
Oh yeah, of course.
The Gunsmoke.
Yeah, the classic training material. Everyone in Hollywood of a certain age learned on Gunsmoke.
You work and you cut on that guns, and I was literally baffled. Like I'm like, and you hold the takes and you put them in this bin. Like it just blew my mind. It really did. But it's something that I think, and if anyone ever gets a chance out there, if you're listening, gets a chance to actually edit a small little bit on film, it is a wonderful text. Like the feeling, the smell, it is wonderful. Yeah. But on a practical standpoint, and because of the speed that we cut today, it's just such a. It's just different.
Yeah. It was a different rhythm and a different process. But like you say, a lot of fond memories of that method. But after I had been cutting for a while on the Avid, I was trying to do something on this product called Radius Edit, which I was helping develop.
I remember that one.
Yeah, and I was trying to do a feature on it, and it just wasn't ready for prime time. So I told the guys who I kind of sold the whole idea to, like, this isn't working, we got to go. And he's all, well, okay, well, let's just do it on film. And so I went back to film after having cut on the Avid for 5 years. Oh. And I was like, this ain't going to work, man. I am not going to put myself through this. And finally, we ended up doing it on the Avid, so everything worked out. But going back to film after digital, it's a different experience
without question. So and again, I apologize to the tribe. We've just gone off on a tangent because this is going to happen when you get two editors in a room. We're going to start talking geek. So please bear with us. But there'll be some good stuff, I promise. So how did you get into the business in the first place, Larry?
Well, I was lucky. I was born into a filmmaking family, or a sort of like a technical film person family. My grandfather was a projectionist back in he actually started when he was a kid, cranking the Nickelodeons in Times Square.
Wow.
Yeah. And then he went on to be a sound and projection engineer at CBS News, worked on 60 Minutes with all the legends. And
sure.
Yeah. So, and then, he kind of got my dad into it, and my dad kind of looked around and he said, editing seems like a really interesting thing. And he became an editor and, kind of got a job as a runner, typical, and built this company back in New York that was one of the first sort of like high-end post-production companies for the commercial business. And, he had all these huge accounts like TWA and Clairol and, did a lot of famous commercials that I remember as a kid. You're probably too young.
Oh, but I remember them. But I do remember the pricing on those post houses back in the day. Like $1,000 an hour or something.
Oh, yeah.
It was like the money was flowing back in the day.
It was sweet. He had a like 40 editors working for him at one time.
It was just different time.
Yeah, and he was a real pioneer, because – my father had kind of like this technical side also. He was a very creative guy, but he was also an entrepreneur. And I mean, he created 5 companies out of that, editing situation, and had 40 editors working for him. And so a lot of like these big editors that eventually like kind of transitioned into features, because with all due respect to commercials, they're very creative and stuff. But a lot of people, certainly at that time, they wanted to make movies. They wanted to make films.
They always do.
They didn't want to sell soap. So
right. You're preaching to the choir. I started out in commercials as well. Yeah.
Yeah. So I haven't watched a commercial in 20 years. The
only in fast forward.
Exactly. My DVR is my best friend. But so a lot of these like guys who came out of my dad's shop, like Craig McKay and Richie Marks and Barry Malkin. I mean, those guys worked for Richie worked for Jim Brooks and Francis Coppola. So did Barry and Craig did all of Jonathan Demme's films and things like that. So, like these guys, sort of like were just part of my life, and filmmaking was such a part of my life. So like as soon as I had the opportunity, I just said, that's what I want to do. I want to make movies. And after bopping around for a few years, I was very young and I kind of like wanted to toy. I was toying with cinematography for a while, but after a few years, I just said, "Hey, I'd really like to do this," and I went to work for my dad back as a runner, as a driver, dropping off cans of films at the studios and stuff like that, and and eventually just worked my way up, got into the union, and got a job as an apprentice editor. And really, it was a lot of starting at the bottom. And I was an assistant in features on a 35 millimeter film for 10 years, almost 10 years, about 8 years. And it was just, it was tough coming up and it was slow. It's not like it is today. It can be much quicker, but it was great training ground. And you really got to work and see the process. And, that was, the best education I could have had, I believe, to become a film editor.
I feel that a lot of the new generation coming up, they will never be able to get that. They're never going to be able to get that 10 years of just grinding and watching and really honing the craft, which I did that myself coming up, and I loved it. I mean, yes, would I have loved to have it faster? Yes. And then that world's gone. It's just not the same anymore. But there's something to be said with the apprenticeship. There's something to be said to be, to do it old school and take your time, because you really understand the process of whatever you're doing.
I mean, when you're working on a cut and you're looking at a scene that an editor has put together, like in a first cut, and it's especially back on film, you could stop and talk about it and ask questions.
Right. Every cut was a discussion.
Yeah, exactly. And you could kind of get real insight, about like where they were coming from with it. And then, of course, with the assembly and then starting to see changes. I mean, there was, I think that with digital technology, as wonderful as it is, and I love it, we're siloed to a certain extent. The assistant is in his or her room and they're really kind of focused on managing all the data and, and so forth. And the editor is also kind of like cloistered in there, doing their cut during production. And then, of course, when the director comes in, they're huddled in there. And there's not that kind of like, that period of time where, it used to take a while to make a splice and tape the splice. And, the director would be on the phone for, 10 minutes because it took time to just do the edit. Now, like, the director never has time to go on the phone until you actually have to take a break, and then they go outside and talk on their cell phone. But yeah, it's a different rhythm. But having said that, Alex, I encourage, I come from that world, and I really believe in handing down the craft to my assistants, because I believe that's how it's, best sort of passed on. And I love giving an assistant a scene to cut and seeing what they can do. I know that that's, for the most part, if they show any inclination that they want to cut themselves and not be a lifetime assistant, which some people do, and that's fine also. But, most people want to be editors, and, you give them a scene, and then it's an education for me because you get to see what they bring to the material. And, so I encourage it, and I try to give my assistants as much as possible, within reason. And then, of course, there's these other elements in digital that assistants get to use a lot of their creative, abilities. Like, for example, when I'm doing my first cut, a lot of times I'll just turn my cut over to my assistant and I'll say, hey, could you lay some sound into this? Give me some sort of foundation just to fill it out, because there's such a high expectation when you show the first cut, that you're showing a complete cut. It's not like the old days where you used to show a first cut with no sound on film,
Right.
I mean, the dialogue, but not a lot else. I mean, you just couldn't do it. The chems could only play 2 tracks, and even, there would be a 2-headed moviola, which would play 2 tracks. But now it's like, guys are cutting in 7.1 and 5.1, and these mixes are completely filled out. So the assistant really, in my situation, can flex their creative muscles and sort of get their feet wet just with sound. And that's a great foundation for cutting because, sound is 50% of the deal. I think a lot of people, sort of ascribe to that, and I'm certainly one of them.
Now, you started off as a sound editor, right?
No, well, yes, actually, I wasn't a sound editor, but some of
Assistant.
my earliest stuff was I was an apprentice in sound. I was lucky enough to work for under Dee Dee Allen on a feature that she was doing. And
now, did you work on Back to the Future?
I did. I was Chuck Campbell's assistant editor on Back to the Future and a bunch of other films.
When you're working on Back to the Future, did you even how was that? I mean, was it just another gig? Did you sense anything that this was going to be a special movie? I'm a huge Back to the Future fan. I'm just asking.
No, go ahead. I mean, it was an exciting place to work. It was a company called Real Sound, and Charles Campbell, who was, like a legend, was the owner with a couple of other guys, Lou Edelman and Rick Franklin, I think at the time. Anyway, Chuck essentially was Steven Spielberg's sound guy at the time. He had cut the sound, won an Academy Award for E.T., and he was sort of like top of the
food
pops.
chain.
Top of the food chain in sound editorial. And I was lucky enough to get a gig for him. I had just taken a break and gone traveling in Europe for 4 months. Mm-hmm. And I had come back and I was just looking for a gig, because I needed money. And I met with these guys and they hired me. They liked, the stuff that I had done in picture. And it was a thrill to, when Chuck came to me and said, we're going to do Back to the Future for Bob Zemeckis and Amblin. And, from the first time we saw the film, which was over at the Amblin screening room at Universal, it was a black and white copy of the movie. Mm-hmm. There were no visual effects in it. And, but we watched the movie and we just all knew, wow, this was going to be something that people are just going to lose their shit over, because it was a great movie. It was a blast.
Now, you did, I'm assuming you worked on the first part when they shot everything with Eric Stoltz.
By the time we came on, that had all been reshot.
Oh, okay. So you came on with Michael J.
Yeah, we didn't really even see any of the stuff with Eric. Okay. Yeah, it was all Michael J. Fox, and he was just so good.
Oh my God, it's just that performance is legendary.
Yeah. So we were really excited, and it was a pretty fast schedule. I remember we actually, once we had completed all the cutting, we were mixing on 2 stages in 12-hour shifts.
Yeah, because they lost 6 weeks of shooting a movie that they had to go back on.
Exactly. So we were mixing on, from 9 to, whatever, to 12, and then from 12 to 9.
24. It was 24-hour shifts.
Yeah, it was crazy.
That's insane.
I just remember the screening for the preview screening and the wrap party, and then the weekend it came out. Man, it was as good as it gets in the movie business. And I was just the assistant sound editor,
I know, right?
But then Chuck went ahead and him and Bob Rutledge, the guy who worked with him, won the Academy Award for that movie for sound.
As they should. It was an amazing job they did. Now, how did you jump from sound editing to, I'm assuming, assistant editing, and then you jumped into feature editing?
Well, I always wanted to be a picture editor. I kind of, I have, like I told you, my background is with people who were picture editors. Mm-hmm. And, so after I had done a bunch of sound assisting, I kind of was looking around, and I just started cold calling. That's what, you did. That's what I did in the old days. Mm-hmm. And, I would look through the Hollywood Reporter, used to list things on Tuesdays of films that are starting. Now, of course, you can do it.
You mean on the internet, right?
No.
I'm joking.
The old paper on Tuesdays, it would come out films in the future.
Yeah, I remember that. Yeah, that's where you look for jobs.
Yeah, and I was able to track down another legendary editor who I got very lucky with, Lindsay Klingman, and she was starting a film called Baby Boom with Diane Keaton.
Oh yeah, God, that's 85.
Yeah, 86.
Yeah, something like that.
And Charles Shire and Nancy Myers were making that film. Chuck was directing it, and Nancy and him wrote it and produced it. And Lynn, she invited me over to her house, and we had a conversation, and we talked about filmmaking and my background and her background, and we hit it off. She liked me, and I got the job as the first assistant on that picture. And I just, really I was over the moon. I was so thrilled to be on what at that time was, I thought it was a pretty, good, prestigious picture. I mean, it's certainly
not a studio film. It was a studio film, and it was a big hit too.
It was a really nice film. Sam Shepard was in it, and it was a lot of fun. And you know what? Back in those days, I can't remember how long it was, Alex, but we had over 100 days of shooting. I think something ridiculous like that. I mean, it was for MGM UA at that time.
Yeah.
And, it was just a different environment for filmmakers and budgets. And they weren't making that many films. And Charles and Nancy had done Private Benjamin. So they had,
which another huge hit. That was another huge hit back in the day.
So they had a certain amount of clout.
But you're looking at budgets back then. So for people to understand who's listening, I mean, the budget for Baby Boom must have been like $10 million, $12 million.
Yeah, if it was 15, I would be surprised.
Right. It was not like that's when studios were doing movies like that. They would do 20 of those a year as opposed to just 3 $200 million movies a year now.
Exactly. Yeah, it was a different world, and they were, there was a different market, and it was a blast. The film was just awesome to work on. Charles and Nancy were, they're such.
We'll be right back after a word from our sponsor. And now back to the show.
Creative and they were a lot of fun, in their own kind of crazy writer, director, producer ways. And, I was young and I had a lot of energy, so I could work, 14, 15 hours a day, and it wasn't a problem.
Remember those days? Yeah.
Yeah. And again, that was a great experience. And then I went to do another film with Lindsay, Little Man Tate.
Yes, that was Jodie Foster's first directorial.
Exactly. And
the reason I know all this stuff is because this is the sweet spot of the time I worked at a video store. So I worked in a video store from 87 to like 92, 93.
Yeah.
So anything in that time period, I'm going to know a lot about.
Sort of like prime of my career, man. This is fantastic. So we did that together, and
let me ask you something.
Working with Jodie was just.
I can imagine. I mean, that was her first.
Honor.
It was a great little movie. I remember watching it, and she's a great director. She doesn't get enough credit for it, but she is a really good director.
Yeah, she actually directed a bunch of episodes, or at least a few, of House of Cards, which I thought was kind of cool. And obviously she's gone on to do a bunch of really interesting work. So she's amazing. She's an amazing artist in general. Now, how do you start editing a feature film? What is your process when you literally first day? You've got all the raw footage. It's all been organized for you. How do you start? What's your process of tackling the story, tackling the project? Well, after I get over my initial anxiety attack,
of course, I know it is a daunting mountain you have to climb.
That's something that I was lucky to get from my dad. I was just like, oh my God, how do you cut an entire film? And it's like that old thing, how do you eat an elephant? It's one bite at a time. And that if I could pass anything on to young editors, that's really sort of like the fundamental truth. It's one cut at a time, one scene at a time. Yep. And I'm sort of a nonlinear thinker. I'm an audiovisual learner. I was never a great student in school. If anything, English and literature were my strengths.
Yep. God, it's like we're both in the same pod.
Not real strong at math, unfortunately. My mind works in a very nonlinear way. And that's why when I saw the Avid, I kind of knew this was going to be my future. And a lot of times what I'll do is I'll just start looking at the material and I'll just start pulling stuff that looks good to me. That if it's comedy, I pull stuff that makes me laugh. If it's, a drama, I'll try to, I'll pull stuff that moves me, but I'll just start pulling selects.
But you don't go in order.
This is something that I learned from Lindsay, because, she would just start in the middle of a scene. She would say, oh, that line's great. That's a great performance. That's a great reading. And she would just start cutting there. And I was just like, wow, that's so cool. You don't even have to start at the beginning. You can start at the end. I'll just start pulling stuff. And then, it's that puzzle. It's like taking that select reel and organizing it into some sort of, fashion. And during the process, I might go through and start intercutting dialogue, not just pulling, it'll be, so my first sort of select reel, to describe it best, would be just sort of like this big mishmash of stuff that I liked. And then I go and I weed through it and I weed it out and I try to make things work, because invariably you'll be pulling things that won't necessarily work together, and there will be a part of a reading that you'll want to replace because it wasn't so great, but everything else was great from that reading. So, it's this incredibly, just talking about it with you really gives me a sort of a sense of, joy and fulfillment, because that's really the fulfilling part of it. I would imagine it's something like when a sculptor is sculpting something out of a piece of marble, you're just finding this, beautiful object in there, or, making it as beautiful as you can. Sculptor has a little bit more latitude. I mean, we are given a palette to work off of from the director, but it's finding those gems and sort of shaping them. And then, of course, you get into the sort of like the fine tuning and the tightening, and what I call trying to sing, trying to make it really fly and make it a real scene. And that process is that's kind of like my process on every scene in the movie. And then, you just go and assemble all those scenes. And then before you know it, you got a movie.
It's funny that it's true what they say. The movie is written 3 times, in script form, in production, and in post.
Absolutely.
And those are different versions. And, editing, as long as I have, as well as you, I'm sure, is that, you find the movie. The movie kind of pops itself out at you when you're editing, because sure, you have the script, sure, you have, scenes, but that's very broad. You got to go in there and start chiseling out those little moments, those little looks, that timing. That's not on the paper. That's what the editor brings.
Right. Well, and that's also what the director and the actors bring.
Well, of course, but it's there.
Cinematographer bring, but like you're saying, you're reading the script, and a lot of times as an editor, you'll look at the line script to see what kind of coverage you've got. And you'll read through the script before you start cutting it. I do, at least. I look at the scene. What was the intention here? Mm-hmm. And quite often you'll look at the film and you'll go, well, holy shit, this is totally different. You know what I mean? Mm-hmm. And that's just the process. So much happens on set. Improv and spontaneity, and director brings new ideas. And, quite often it's much different than what's on the page. And, that's another one of the exciting parts about the whole thing.
I was watching the Ron Howard masterclass the other day, and the way he's an absolute technician. I mean, there's just, as far as craft is concerned, you watch him actually direct scenes for like 2 hours.
Nice.
It's amazing. But what I was fascinated with in regards to editing is that he is giving the editor everything he or she needs to cut the scene, and have so many options in order to do it. And that's what I think a professional director does. It just gives you those options, because you just never know what's going to work and what's not going to work, and a lot of times.
Yeah, I mean, when you work with a director of that, that level of craftsmanship, it's a joy, because they know all the pieces, and you hear about people talk about, like they see the film in their head, as they're shooting it, they're seeing it play in their head. Mm-hmm. They're seeing all the cutaways and things like that. And then when you get that, as an editor, because when you read the script, quite often you'll sort of see it in your head also. And when you get that material, you're just like, oh, thank God, And it's interesting that you say that, he's sort of very technically oriented. All of our crafts have so much of a technical aspect to them. Absolutely. It is a craft of technology. I mean, think about, the earliest movies. They were these machines, and you need to know how those machines work and how to utilize them and how to harness the power of them. And that goes from everything from now, I mean, even pre-visualization and 3D and stuff like that, to editing. And, some people poo-poo the technical aspects of editing, and, that's a shame. And you really, some people have said that the art is derived from the craft, and, you need to know how to use your tools, mm-hmm. To really have power over them.
No question at all. Now, can you do me a favor, and can you explain to the tribe what's an assemble cut versus a locked cut?
Oh, wow. Well, That's a long journey. I've worked on films where the first cut was 5.5 hours long. So
that would be the assemble cut.
That would be the first assembly or the editor's cut.
Sure.
And, not to seem touchy or anything like that, because I really don't, I'm not hung up about this, but, it's really not an assembly. I mean, maybe back in the old days of film, it was an assembly when they used to use paper clips to put it together, and then they would have to be hot spliced. I mean, with digital tools, with the Avid, or really any nonlinear editor, you can really refine your cut in the assembly. However, you're still assembling everything they shot. And sometimes, you'll have a 150-page script, not as much anymore, but, you'll have a 120-page script that will just run much longer than, anticipated. And, especially with the kind of things that I've been doing most recently, improv comedy, you'll have improv that will just sort of like go off the rails and just, extend the cut. So, improvised scenes, alternate scenes, things like that. Now, you have to show the director everything they shot. At least I believe that you really show the director everything they shot when you present your first cut. So the journey is taking that first cut from what could be anywhere from, 2.5 to 5.5 hours or longer, and bringing it down to whatever the, appropriate running length of the film will, ultimately be. And a lot of times the rule in comedy is, comedy shouldn't be longer than 90 minutes. It's not always the case, but a lot of, I've worked for directors, I'm not releasing this film for, any longer than 90 minutes. And like, okay, well, our first cut is 3 hours. What are we going to cut out?
a lot of jokes are going.
Yeah, exactly. And a lot of crap will go, that you thought was funny maybe, and, was funny in dailies, but, just isn't working in terms of the story. Yeah. So it's that process of taking the film from its original, assembly and bringing it down to the final length, the tested length. Usually you will have several previews, and sometimes they'll be in a theater with 300 people, and other times it'll just be, friends and family, 10 people in a room. And it's that process of refining, and obviously now with visual effects, it's creating and finaling the visual effects, music with the composer, and of course all of the the source cues now, and of course sound effects, and building out an awesome soundtrack. So that's kind of like where you start. And that's why they give directors 10 weeks, as per the Directors Guild contract, to put together their cut. And then, of course, the producers come in and they pitch their notes and give us their ideas. And then, of course, the studio
executives, of course.
Yeah, and they pitch their notes and give us their ideas. And so it's this, it's this journey from, camera to now it's called a DCP, the digital release.
Digital cinema package.
Yeah, exactly, which you see in the theaters. So, it's like being part of a traveling circus. What can I tell you?
Now, this is something I always love asking editors, because it's something that we've all have to deal with in a room with clients. Are there any tricks to handling creative differences between directors, producers, executives in the suite while you're there? Because I've had actual clients throw fists in my room with each other, and you're just the editor. You're just sitting there like and you're trying to appease both masters. And so you're basically Switzerland. You're like, Alex, Alex, show him that cut, and I show him the cut. No, show him the other cut. It's like you're like Switzerland. So what do you do? Any tips for those young editors out there when they have that client? I'm not talking about creative differences between you as the editor and the director. That shouldn't happen. But between a director, producer, or executives in the room?
Well, I think my essential lesson or advice would be stay out of the line of fire.
Right, because there's a lot of that.
Dodge the bullets as best as possible. Hide behind your Avid if possible. No, I mean, it's part of the job, and it's certainly a skill set that you're going to need to develop and get better at as you get further on in your career. Obviously you work for the director and you're trying to, help them realize their vision. And that's your first loyalty. And you're going to have disagreements with the director, but it's best that you have those without the producer and the studio around. Those are discussions, creative discussions, explorations that you're going to have. And, you'll come to, your ultimate decisions, in those situations. And it's different. I mean, let's say if it's the first time you're doing a film for a director, you're going to have to learn their process and how much they're willing to tolerate in terms of feedback and input and things like that. But, I'm assuming that Film Schoonmaker has some pretty substantial input on Martin Scorsese's films.
You think?
They've been working together for 25 years, and they're not kids. And I think that he values her strong opinions, as most directors will of, editors of that stature. But again, at the end of the day, it's the director's decision. Now, when directors and producers go at it and try to put you in the middle of it, you really do have to become Switzerland, or you could be cutting off your nose to spite your face. You could be ending a relationship with a director by saying something that compromises their point of view.
And that gets around.
Of course, it gets around, and, as an editor, you don't have that many clients. You'll work on a movie for 8 months or a year, as opposed to mixers who can do 3, 4, 5 movies in a year. You know what I'm saying? Yeah. Or people in production who could do 3 or 4 movies a year. I mean, the production at the longest these days is 3 or 4 months long, and most of them are more like 30 days long. So, you're working on, movies for a long time with a person. So that relationship is really important. Now, of course, you've got to respect the studio and their decisions, and their desires also. But that's really, that's really something that I've learned, to let the director work out with the studio. And if the studio puts you in the middle of it, you got to say, look, I'm just the editor of this film. You really got to talk to the director, and you really got to, figure out a way to get what you want by working with them. And, there are so many producers on films now.
Oh, God.
I mean, back in the day, if there were 2 or 3 producers, it would be, that would be a lot. But now it's, 10,
20,
12. Exactly. So, it's more like, a little bit of a committee. And a lot of times if they're all in there, or maybe 8 of the 12 are in there, there's more of sort of like a massaging of the director's ego and sort of like persuasion. So it makes it a little bit easier for, the editor to stay out of the line of fire. But of course, when they leave the room, it's always me and the director sort of like sorting out the opinions. Right. And a lot of times we'll be just like, oh, those, flipping idiots. And
right. So basically, the second the producers leave, the director goes, Larry, put it back the way I had it. Larry, put it back. I don't care what they say. Put it back the way I had it.
Well, it depends. I mean,
it does. It depends. It depends, obviously, on the situation. Now, what's the craziest thing that happened to you in an edit suite that you can discuss publicly?
Oh, geez. I don't know. I mean, there have been so many crazy things. I've always tried to, keep the peace. And like I say, the older and wiser I've gotten, the more I've realized that it's important to stay out of the line of fire and keep my mouth shut, because, sometimes, honestly, they don't want your opinion. They'll be very forward about it, and that's the whole sort of like, above the line, below the line sort of. I'm not a 5-time Academy Award nominee, so like the power that I have or the clout that I have isn't going to be the same as as some other people. But there have been all kinds of crazy situations. There have been more like nightmare situations where you are screening the film 2 or 3 times a week for 12 producers, and the directors very, very insecure and indecisive, and you're ending up trying to, meet the desires of 12 different masters, and you end up, coming up with kind of like a really disgusting stew that nobody wants to eat. And the really good experiences have been where a director has a vision, really kind of like sees what they want to do, and also has the sort of political and diplomatic savvy to, persuade, the powers that be.
We'll be right back after a word from our sponsor. And now back to the show. To that vision, it's the director's job is sort of like I always think of Francis Coppola as like this master of not only the craft, but also of politics. And obviously he was a great artist also, but, you're really having to, sell people on your idea. And I can't imagine, I haven't been in any of the cutting rooms. I've never done like one of these giant tentpole Marvel movies or things, or Star Wars or something like that. And I just can't imagine what it's like when there's that kind of money on the line. Oh my God.
I've done a couple of I did a film, for Warner Brothers. It was, it was like an $80 million budget. So that was, somewhat, but still it was a different time. And now 20 years later, I can't imagine what it's like, the pressure on the director and the editor, or editors. And, to a certain extent, there aren't that many auteurs left, and the whole sort of auteur theory is sort of like really
the Nolans, the Finchers. There's a handful of them, but not many.
Yeah, there's not many of those guys left, and
well, especially in the studio system, maybe more in the indie world.
Yes,
but in the studio system, the Coppolas, there's Scorsese, there's Spielberg, but that's the old guard.
Yeah, and it's just not happening as much anymore.
It's hard with $200 million on the line. It's just so hard.
And a lot of times, on some of these visual effects movies, they're hiring, people with a visual effects background, whether it's a visual effects artist or
VFX soup or somebody that understands it.
Exactly, and they don't have a lot of clout, and I think that was evidenced by the replacement of Ron Howard on the Star Wars film.
Yeah,
and so. The studios in those situations, they're really running the show. They're calling the shots, and they have final say. I mean, very few directors have final cut anymore, except for, like you say, the Nolans.
But Nolan proved himself already.
Exactly.
Fincher proved himself already. I mean, obviously Spielberg and Scorsese and
right.
and that guy with Jimmy Cameron. Yeah, him.
yeah. But again, you can count all those people on your hands.
Two hands, you've got them. Yeah, there's not that many guys that can wield that kind of power anymore.
Right. So the rest of them are they're just in there slogging it out.
They're just trying until you make $1 billion, and then all of a sudden, like Ryan Coolidge, I'm sure is going to have a lot more sway on the next movie.
And boy, I don't think anybody else deserves it more than him. I mean, that film Fruitvale Station was I thought one of the best films.
It was great, and Creed was awesome too. I thought Creed was very good.
Yeah, that guy's got some real talent, and now, I mean, boy, the world is his oyster.
He blew it out of the water, man.
God bless him. It couldn't happen to a better filmmaker.
Now, you edited Assassins. Was that $80 million movie you were talking about?
Yeah, I think Assassins was something like that. I was talking about Jack Frost. I mean, that had
God, yeah, Jack Frost. That would be Michael Keaton.
Yeah, and Kelly Preston, and that had a $10 million budget just for ILM. So
that was a huge VFX budget. I remember that. That was when Michael was off Batman.
Yes, off of Batman. Right, we actually shot it down at the Spruce Goose Dome where they did some of the early Batmans.
Yeah,
and that was a real good experience though. I had worked a lot at Warner Brothers coming up, and Troy Miller and I had a real good relationship. And
how was it to work with Dick Donner? Because he's, a legend.
Yeah, Dick Donner was that was a pleasure, and it was really, I got to tell you, it was sort of like living in the lap of luxury because
of course.
there was a guy with clout and talent and just a fun and nice person to work with. And of course, I worked on that with Richie Marks, one of my mentors. And but the crazy thing about that was one of Warner Brothers' accelerated schedules. I think it was 3 months. I had 3 days off, so it was intense to say the least.
And just so everybody listening knows, people who are listening who don't know who Richard Donner, I just call him Dick Donner because I know him obviously. Richard Donner, because Richard Donner is basically the godfather of the superhero movie. He shot the first 2 Supermans, as well as the Lethal Weapons, as well as Goonies. And the list goes on and on. He's an absolute legend. And I've heard nothing but that he's the sweetest, nicest person in Hollywood.
Yeah, he was a great guy to work for. I remember we were there on a Saturday once, and they would have like a mountain of fruit, and just so we have some breakfast. And there was a little bit of fruit missing from this mountain, and he would come by and say, "Where's the fruit? They need more food. These people need food to work." And it was always like that. And again, because he was such a powerful guy and filmmaker. With a lot of clout, there was never there was no busting balls over overtime or things like that.
You're in a different world then. You're in a complete. I know people who work in that world that the money's not an issue. Just do the job. Just do the job.
Yeah. So it was fun. I came on after they got back from location, and and Richie really was the driving force editorially. I mean, there's here's the guy who was sort of like the supervising editor on Apocalypse Now and Godfather 2 and like I said, all the Jim Brooks films. So
he's done okay. He did okay.
Yeah, nominated for like 5 Academy Awards. So it was just a real privilege and fun because I was kind of like the hot shot at the Avid and I'd be like doing things like putting a gunshot in, I would like cut out a flash from Photoshop and make sure I was like a creative genius. They're like, oh my God, I can't believe you can do that. Back in '95.
Can you imagine like you're cutting out a muzzle flash in the Avid and like doing it for a frame and they're like, what is this witchcraft you're doing?
Yes. We must have this guy on all of our films, and Joel Silver was there, and this was before the Matrix.
Joel was still Joel. I mean, he did the Lethal Weapons. He was a legendary producer before even the Matrix.
Yeah, exactly. So, it was a lot of fun, but it was a crazy schedule. It was just nuts. And, it was fun though, it was fun, it's a rush. And then, being a freelancer, you do those kinds of things. And, look, I was much younger then. I don't know if I could do it today.
Sure.
But you do those things and then, you take a month off, you have to decompress after something.
Oh, absolutely. Without question. Now you are now starting to give back of yourself and trying to teach other generations the craft, as we talked about a little earlier, and you created a course called the Master the Workflow. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, I was doing this film. I've done 2 films with a guy named Mike Titus, who's just a terrific director and a great guy, and we get along great. And he's been working with Marlon Wayans and Marlon's partner Rick Alvarez for a long time. And we were finishing up Naked, or we were sort of like halfway into it. And, like I said, I always try to sort of powwow with my people. And Richard Sanchez was my assistant on that film. And Richard's a crack assistant. He's just top notch and reminds me of myself when I was a kid. He really into the job, into the technical aspect as well as the creative aspect, has like an encyclopedia knowledge of film. So he's a lot of fun to work with. And one day, I'm in his room just trying to, get a breather, just get a break from, the stuff that's rolling over your eyeballs. And we're talking and he's showing me, sort of his process. And I'm just thinking about how different the process was from the time I was an assistant, certainly on film. And he's showing me this digital code book that he, created in FileMaker Pro. And basically like the whole movie is in this file, like all of the information, all of the metadata, the EDLs, the continuity, the timings, all the ADR and music notes, everything's in there. And I'm just like thinking, wow, that is such a powerful tool. And, it just got me thinking that where do assistants get trained properly in the workflow? Where do they get trained in the process? In the professional filmmaking world. And, I certainly have, a certain amount of respect for, film schools and things like that. But, it's not the real world experience. It's not being in the trenches and running up against the things that you run up against. And so we started like throwing ideas around about creating this course that would teach the process from the time you meet with your editor, mm-hmm. and how that sort of interview goes and what you might expect from something like that, through starting the picture, all the way through final delivery and every step of the way. And I'm talking about, we really drill down. It's 6 modules, it's 32 lessons and more than 13 hours of material of what the experience of assisting on a feature film. It really could be at any budget level. Obviously, there's going to be more complexity. The more, the higher the budget, the more visual effects, things like that. But we cover visual effects, and we just documented the process. And Richard essentially, sort of narrates the whole thing because it's his bailiwick, and he's an expert at it. And I, obviously edited it, and we batted, feedback with each other. And we put it out there, and what happened was the response was so great. It just really confirmed that there are so many people out there that want to learn this process. I mean, it's not like one of your typical certification courses that you might from Avid or Adobe or even Apple. It's sort of real world experience from people who have done, cumulatively. Richard and I have, I've done over 45 features and television shows, and, he's done over 15. So, people who have been there, who have been in the trenches, and like I said, we're getting great feedback, and, it's really nice because it's great to see these young people and some not so young, who want this material, who find it has a lot of value for them. And they're just so excited about making movies, and that's a thrill because that's kind of like that's what lights my fire.
Well, great. I'll put a link to it in the show notes so everybody listening, if you want to get real training on how to be an assistant editor, or at least understand what an assistant editor does, definitely check out the course. I've bumped around in there a little bit, and I would have killed for that when I was coming up. So congrats on that, Larry.
Thank you.
Now, what advice would you give an editor wanting to break into the business today?
Well, I think we've talked a lot about some of the things that that I did to get into the business. It's different now, but I think that on kind of like a fundamental level, it's not really all that different. Some of the tools that you use are different, but you've got to kind of get, if you want to work in long form, you've got to get into that world somehow. Now, just getting your foot in the door, there's a lot of ways you could just get a job in some sort of, production environment, whether it's a PA, a runner, if you're doing that, even on a production, you'll be able to a lot of times sort of, peek your head into the cutting room and meet the assistants and the editors sometimes. And, you start making that, your world. And, a lot of people get into editing these days through reality. And because that's actually a way, from, the best of my knowledge, is that's a way to get into the union. And and major films and television shows are controlled by the unions. That's just a fact of life. Mm-hmm. So, you sort of, again, you sort of make your goal, part of your world. And another way to kind of like do this is by utilizing the power of the internet. I know that young people are very familiar with all of these things, but I've been fascinated to see how many people have been able to make connections and introductions and so forth through Facebook groups. And there are Facebook groups for every part of the making process.
Everything.
And in every city, so if you want to localize things, if you're in New York or in LA or, in Mumbai, you can look for a post-production group there. And, if you're a decent human being and you don't alienate everybody, because some people do that in these groups, you can really start to make connections. And that wasn't possible when I was young. I mean, again, we talked about it. You went through the variety and you looked for the films in production.
Sure. Now, go ahead.
Yeah. Go ahead.
No. So what is the lesson that took you the longest to learn, whether in the film business or in life?
Oh, Jesus. I'm still learning them. But in the film business, the lesson was, early on, there have been many lessons, my friend. But early on, if you're trying to get into the business, obviously there's going to be some time where you're going to, try to have some experimentation. But if you realize, kind of early on, maybe out of college or something, that you want to be an editor, focus on that and sort of be directed in terms of really going for that. I mean, don't take a job unless it's absolutely necessary, in some other part of the business, where you're not going to be exposed to the post-production process. You're not going to be exposed to editors and assistants and things like that, because, I sort of spent a lot of time pursuing the cinematography thing, until I realized I didn't want to live that life. I didn't want to be on the road. If you want to be a cinematographer, pursue that. If you want to be an editor, pursue that. If you want to be a writer, write. This kind of a common expression is like writers write, actors act. Yes, we all have to make a living, but you can't be half-assed about this career path.
No, you cannot.
It's just, you can't be half committed. It's just too competitive, and there are too many people out there. So, that would be a lesson early on. I think I mentioned one of the lessons as an editor, say less, listen more unless you're asked, and then be careful what comes out of your mouth. I think that, I think as a young person, I was, I valued my opinions much more than. Well,
that's youth, man. That's just youth in general.
Yeah, and I think that, could get people in trouble. I think that, listen, stay out of the line of fire, be respectful, work hard. I don't think it's any kind of, mystery. Again, it's a competitive business, and you want to make as many, friends as possible. Always be nice to the apprentice, because you never know when they're going to be running the studio. Was an expression that used to be told. And it's very true. You never know when that schlepper is going to be write a great script and get a directing deal. So,
I just don't. As the best advice ever is like, just don't be a dick.
Yeah, that's something that Richard and I, this kind of Richard's phrase, because a lot, again, in this online stuff, you've got people who are just, they're dicks, and it's like,
yeah.
Why are you alienating yourself from your community here? Just be a nice person. Check your ego to a great extent. I mean, you could be the next, Tarkovsky, but just show it. Don't talk about it.
Exactly. Now, what are 3 of your favorite films of all time?
Well, I came up, and the reason, the reasons I wanted to be in the film business were films like Bonnie and Clyde, and Didi Allen's films were great. Didi actually worked across the hall from my father back in New York, so I always knew about her. I loved Reds. I love period dramas. Another editor that comes out of that sort of like school was a guy who just recently passed away, a great editor named Jerry Greenberg, cut The French Connection. The French Connection was
what an amazingly edited film that was.
Yeah. So, Dog Day Afternoon, another film of Dee Dee's, was kind of mind blowing. I mean, but, I go back. I mean, I think about the films that kind of like shaped my view of the world, like 12 Angry Men with Henry Fonda and all those great actors. More recently, I mean, it's just, there's so many great films. Oh, I cannot mention Apocalypse Now. I mean, that was like
mind blowing.
I saw that at the Cinerama Dome at a midnight show when it was called the Cinerama Dome, excuse me. That was like, wow, you can change the world with movies, and you can change people's, ideas about war and politics and life.
We'll be right back after a word from our sponsor. And now back to the show.
And I thought, that's what I want to do. I want to, be able to help shape, people's, viewpoints and help them see. Now, of course, I went into Hollywood and made a bunch of silly comedies, but
there's still much value in making people laugh, without question.
Yeah. So, I mean, they just don't make those kinds of films as much anymore. And if they do, they're indie world. And, it's those films are few and far between, but, there've been a lot of movies that I've loved.
Now, where can people find you?
Oh, well,
online, not like your house address.
The course is at mastertheworkflow.com, and please come and visit us if you have an interest in getting into the assistant editing world, which we believe leads to film editing, and is sort of historically the best path to become a feature film editor. And you can check us out there. We've got some, free downloads, some, information about, like your 5 key contacts on set, and some other information about the course. Check us out. And, I want this to be timely, but we're going to be speaking at Avid Connect this year. And we'll also be at the LAC PUG Super Meet at Las Vegas at NAB this year.
Oh, you're going to be at NAB? Great. I'm going there too.
Yeah. We're partnering with people like Avid and ACE. We're at the Edit Fests. We were there in last year.
Nice.
And we'd love it if we're going to try to get to London this year. And we're just going to be talking about editing and assisting and post-production, and introduce yourself. And I'd be happy to answer any questions I can.
Larry, man, thank you so much for just dropping knowledge bombs on the tribe today. I truly, truly appreciate you taking the time out.
Oh, well, it was fun, Alex. Thank you for taking the time to talk to me.
I want to thank Larry for being on the show and dropping some knowledge bombs on the editing front for the tribe. And if you guys are interested in his course, just head over to indiefilmhustle.com/235 for the show notes, and there you will have a link to his course. And that's it for me today, guys. I got a lot of work to do, working on some cool stuff for you, some new content. So, as always, keep that hustle going. Keep that dream alive, and I'll talk to you soon.
Thanks for listening to the Indie Film Hustle podcast at indiefilmhustle.com. That's INDIEFILMHUSTLE.com.